All right. Well, I'm so excited. Again, my name is Beto Gudiño. For those of you who are tuning in, the host of Christian Podcast here in Costa Mesa, California, a signal of hope to all the world. And today we have two very special guests. Their names is Robert and Taylor Barriger, and they are pastors who live in Peru. So how amazing and international is that? It's so good. How are you guys doing?
Hey, we're doing amazing. Welcome to summertime. We head into summer this time of year and down the other side of the equator.
Yep.
Love it. How are you, Taylor?
Good. Kind of wish we're in beautiful Costa Mesa right now. We're kind of. I was born in San Diego, and my dad grew up in LA and then Bible school in San Diego. So I got a lot of family down in that from here up in that area. But you're suffering for Jesus, man. You're having a hard time, huh?
Yeah, suffering for Jesus, man. Here with my two guitars, writing songs.
Yeah.
In the always eternal summer of California.
Amazing.
Almost.
Right. Well, thank you guys for coming on the show. I see, Taylor, that you have a fireplace going on and it's summer.
It's a fake fireplace. It's Christmas, man. You gotta have the mood happening.
Okay, just for the mood.
Yeah, it's one of those 10-hour. It's one of those 10-hour YouTube, loops.
Nice. Well, that's so cool. Again, thank you guys for coming on the show. You guys have an amazing podcast that I've been listening to called Haciendo Iglesia, and you guys are super fluent in Spanish. So before we get to talking about you guys' podcast and why you do it and, the people that it's touching and all of that, I would love to get to know you guys a little bit more. So would you tell me, who you are and what you do?
Starting with, okay.
Let's start with Mr. Robert.
Well, I grew up out there in your neighborhood, like Taylor said, Santa Monica, Los Angeles. Got saved in the Jesus movement. In fact, we used to drive down to Costa Mesa back in the early days of Calvary Chapel when they were still meeting in a tent, and went to a lot of their concerts in the early 70s, 72, 73. Went to Bible school in San Diego. Spent about 10 years there in training. And in 1983, packed up my wife and two kids. Taylor was just a little baby, 2-year-old little towhead, and packed us all up, moved down to Peru, and we've been here ever since. So going on 38 years here in Peru.
Wow, that's about how old I am. Well, I'm 39. Wow, that's amazing. What about you, Taylor? Who you are and what you do?
Well, I was forced to come to Peru at the age of 2. I had no say in the matter. No. I feel like it's a privilege to have grown up here, and that Peru is my home. Part of the curiosity of the story is that when I was 14, my parents came to me and said, "Hey, would you like to go back to the U.S. and play sports?" And I said, "Absolutely not. And I'm happy here." My dad says, "Well, think about it. In 5 years, would you regret not have gone?" And he said, "Think about it. Pray about it." And so I was like, "I don't know." All right. So several weeks went by, and he said, "What do you think?" I go, "I don't know. I'm open to it." And he goes, "Why don't we do a trip?" So we there was a school in the States, part of a church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Christian Life. And we went and visited, and the basketball team was playing in the state final at the LSU arena, and we were there for that moment. And they won the championship. My dad and I turned to each other and were like, "What do you think?" And I said, "Yes, I want to come here. It's God." And so at 15, my parents dropped me off in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So I did high school, my sophomore, junior, and senior year of high school in the States by myself, living with a family. At 18, I got the call of God in my life. Went to a seminary. The funny story, kind of tangent, is we lost the state semifinals in basketball in Shreveport, the big arena there, and my dad, he flew up just to see me play, and we caught back up in Baton Rouge eating marble slab or stone cold pizza or stone cold ice cream, whatever that is. And I said, hey, I feel called. And it was the first time I ever voiced that. So I went to a seminary. Long story short, I spent a total of 10 years in the U.S.
Wow.
And then moved back at 25 as a missionary to Peru. And now I'm 40. And God's been good. And it's what a privilege to work alongside my parents and just to be a help.
That's right. And that's something I've noticed with the podcast, Haciendo Iglesia. I just love the interaction between both of you guys, the father and son connection. And I mean, thank you for sharing a little bit of your story, back when you were 15, because as I was preparing for this podcast, I myself, I'm a parent. I have 3 little kids. Well, kind of little. My youngest is 4 and she's a girl. And then I have 2 boys who are 9 and 11. So as I think of, raising my own children and, kind of like being involved here in ministry, and, I have my own story of how God is, has called me into doing like all this crazy stuff and being here at the church and whatnot. But as I think of my kids and growing up with them, I feel like, how can I infuse in them that like passion or that connection to Jesus in a way that maybe when they're, when they're 15 or 20 or whatever, they can hear God's voice calling them. Because I think God is God, and he's always working and he calls us. So I have no doubt about God calling them, but I have more curiosity about what is it that I can empower my kids or the tools that I can give them so they can listen to that voice. So would you tell me a little bit about you guys' family? Maybe Robert, if you want to, I don't know, I mean, 30 years of ministry, I'm sure there's a lot, but can you tell me a little bit of like your biggest tools maybe that helped you influence Taylor as he was growing up?
My biggest tool is without a doubt coffee.
Love it. I love coffee, man. So I'm on the right path.
You're right there, right near Portolos. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Portolos.
Portolos.
Yeah, Newport.
It's a good place.
Nice.
Gosh, I don't know. A lot of people have asked us that question, and I'm not really sure of the answer as to how we were able to impart to our kids their own walk with God and their own faith. I think it's that we were always real with them. I think it's also that we didn't force anything on them. We let them make their own choices, their own walk with God. And sometimes people say things like, don't bring the ministry home, don't talk shop at the table. We always brought the ministry home and always talked shop at the table.
Wow.
And when we had the, friends over and there was the adult table and the kids table, my kids always wanted to sit with the adult table because they wanted to hear the conversation.
It's true.
So, we never separated them from what we did in the ministry. We always made them an intricate part of it.
Yeah, wow. Dad, you have something about that. When I left to school, you gave a teaching about Moses. I think that's really particular now, right?
Yeah, it's a story of Moses. I remember that where, Jochebed and Moses' parents, they had Amram and Jochebed. They got this baby, and then this edict comes out, kill all the children, all the boys. Mm-hmm. So we could say, they raised a son. She was pregnant at the wrong time. Mm. Sometimes people think, the world's tough today. Well, that was tough. When you get, the edict that you're pregnant, and if it's a boy child, if it's a male, you've got to take that down to the river Nile and kill it. So the Bible says in Hebrews that they hid him as long as they could. And the teaching I tell parents is, don't be afraid to hide your kids from the world as long as you can. The day will come when you can't hide them anymore. So, but hide them from the world as long as you can. And then it's curious because, you know, Amram, the mom, and Jochebed, they took Moses. I mean, I'd say, let's get out of Egypt for right now. Let's go to another country. We got to save this kid. But they took him to the same river they were killing Hebrew boys, the Nile River. She built an ark and sent him out. And my teaching was, when you can hide your kids no more, build an ark of prayer, build an ark and send them off into the world, trusting that God will take care of them. So the day will come where every parent, you've got to just, you're building an ark for now, but the day will come when you've got to release them into the world. And if you've built a good ark, then they'll float. They'll be okay.
Wow. That's massive. Taylor, do you feel like a little bit of that arc might have been when he sent you to, to high school in the United States? Was that a little, because you said you felt the calling, a little bit after. Yeah. Was that part of the journey? Can you tell me a little bit about how that went? How did you experience?
Absolutely. I mean, that was back when internet was still in its infancy. So there were no cell phones. The only way to call was using a calling card or calling collect. And so we wouldn't talk often. Honestly, I think about it now and I'm mortified, but we would have a phone call maybe once a month. Because calling collect, and it was so expensive. And so it was a very, and maybe every now and then an email, right? With the modem remember that? AOL and all that kind of stuff. So we weren't having that much communication back and forth. It was very rare. But I look back now and I can feel the anointing of prayer on my life, on my decisions. I didn't. When I went, I had a few peers that go at the same time with me. And it was a Christian school, but by no means was it full of Christians at all. And so quite a few friends went down the wrong path. And for some reason, I didn't. And it wasn't that I was that smart or wise. I was clueless. But I look back and I go, wow, there's something else just protecting me. And it was that ark of prayer. And I know my parents really just went at it, and not freaky like I bind and not Kenneth Copeland and heavy metal, not that. It was just that's the best. That's one of the best videos I've ever seen. But
it's good.
It's good. But it's really just something simple like God, I trust you. It's in your hands. And like my dad said, they never said, hey, you have ministry in your life. Hey, you're going to be a pastor. They never said that. I wanted to be a graphic designer. And they go, well, we'll do anything we can to help you achieve what's in your heart. And so when I told my dad I have ministry in my heart, I was 17, about to be 18. And it was a watershed moment. It was a before and after. And my parents were shocked. My mom says it this way. My mom says that when she and my dad left me in Baton Rouge, that they said goodbye forever in their hearts. As in, they never expected I would come back to Peru. And so me coming back to Lima to work with them is more of a bonus than anything else.
Yeah, it reminds me almost like I'm sure you've heard this phrase in Spanish, right? Something like, déjalo ir y si regresa es tuyo, si no, nunca lo fue. Like, let him go, and if he comes back, that means it's yours. If not, he was never yours from the beginning, right? It's a phrase we have. Wow, man, what an amazing journey and calling and team. I think you guys have a tremendous team. I love to see the work that you guys are doing in Peru. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit, maybe Robert, would you tell us a little bit about that calling to Peru? Like, why going to a Latin American country and with a different language, different culture, different everything. I mean, right now you guys are in your summer and we're here almost like getting to our winter, even though California is almost like never winter. But I mean, so different. How was your calling into being in Peru?
It started back there when I was over in Santa Monica. I was in a small church. Well, grew, Hope Chapel. We were there in the beginning stages of Hope Chapel when they were going, and there was a little grandma in church. I was just a hippie surfer coming off the beaches, literally. And this little grandma in church kind of adopted us, just loved on us every time we showed up in church, had a little piece of cake she baked for us or something. And one day she started feeding me some missionary books and stories. And this little grandma one day, she just said, the hardest thing you could do for God is be a missionary. And I said, well, Grandma, just challenge my manhood. I'll do it. So I went to the pastor and I said, I think I want to be a missionary. What do I do? And he said, go study. And I said, where? He goes, I don't care. Find a place. That was literal. Ralph Moore was the pastor back in those days. And recently I asked Ralph, why did you say that to me? He remembered it, wow. 40 some years later, or 48 years later, he remembered it. He says, you were so pure, I didn't want our denominational seminary to wreck you. So I found a Bible school in San Diego that had missions emphasis, moved to San Diego, visited the mission field for the first time in 1978 here in Peru, and had such a touch in my heart for this nation that I just got on my knees with my wife and we prayed. We said, God, if you send us back to Peru, we'll give our life to this nation.
Wow.
And we did. It took us 5 years to get here, but we came and never went back.
Wow. What were some of those items that struck you the most when you got to Peru that you felt like, God's, if you're going to send me, but what were some of those, you're mentioning like just things that struck you?
Well, there's one story, and I don't know if I have time to go into the whole story, but it's the actual call. I can go into it quickly. We got here in 1978. It was kind of an old school Pentecostal type thing. And my pastor called to the missionary and said, they think they want to be missionaries, give it to them tough. So we landed in Peru, and the missionary here believed in giving it to us tough. We're on a 26-hour bus ride the next morning to Ecuador and had to preach every night in different villages all the way back to Lima for the next 2 weeks. And I'm allergic to fish. Peru is a coastal city, I ate fish every day, and I was vomiting blood every night. So I didn't like Peru. I didn't like the mission field. But then we went up into the Central Mountains, and on the way into a little village called Pampas. It's a village, no lights, no running water. People live the same way they lived for 2,000 years, where they'd wake up, didn't even hardly have money. They bartered their corn for, noodles or whatever they needed at the market, salt or soap. And the pastor, when he got there, he just felt God called him to put a church. They'd never had a church in the city, never, ever. Pastor's name was Moses. And when he got there, he did what the Apostle Paul did, went to the market on Sunday when everybody came in to change things. And, he went and started preaching the gospel. Well, the local religious leaders, and they still worship 22 Inca gods, wow. Sun, moon, rain, corn, thunder. They worshiped all these gods, offering animal and even occasional human sacrifices when he was there. So Moses preached the gospel. The local religious leaders said, we don't want that. So they ordered the people to stone Moses. They stoned him and left him for dead.
Wow.
So Moses, somebody picked him up in the market, saw him how he was, threw him in a taxi, sent him back to the big city of Huancayo. And in Huancayo, 30 days later, after he walked out of the hospital, he felt the Holy Spirit said, now go back and plant a church. So he did. He went back in there saying, they're going to kill me or I'm going to put a church there. And when I heard this story, I thought, my God, that's like the book of Acts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's stuff you read about in the book of Acts. All I could think is I want to get a picture of Moses. I just want to take his picture and go back and tell the people in San Diego at my church about Moses. What a man, what a story. So we got in the city. I preached that night in this little village church, 17 little Quechua Indian people being translated from English to Spanish to Quechua. I put all 17 to sleep. I gave my best message and they all were sound asleep. Dirt floors, candles on the walls. Well, the next morning we baptized the first believers for him. And he told us the rest of the story. He said, when I got here, somebody gave me a little piece of paper with a name saying, maybe this man could help you. He found the house, knocked on the door, a little Indian man came out, and the man said, can I help you? And the pastor Moses said, yeah, this man told me to talk to you. What do you need? He says, I want to preach the gospel here. And the man said, they tried to kill the last guy that tried to do it. And Moses said, that was me.
Wow.
So the man put his head down, went inside the house, came back out, had a little banner across. He was the mayor of the city.
Mm.
And the mayor went out and ordered the 4 police in the city to give him protection when he preached.
Wow.
Not many got saved, but one was the mayor.
Mm.
And we went to the mayor's house for breakfast, a little humble, abode that he had. And the mayor began to cry, said, thank you for coming, and told me his story. He says, since I've been saved, since I became a Christian, they tried to kill me 3 times. And I thought, and you're still serving God? This is the book of Acts. Can I get your picture? I got to go tell your story. It's a great mission story. But he was in tears. He said, thank you for coming. And I said, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for having us. And he goes, no, I want to thank you for coming. And I said, no, I want to thank you for having us. And finally, Moses heard us arguing back and forth. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having us. And Moses said, Robert, you don't get it, do you? I said, get what? He says, whenever people come to Peru, they always go to the big cities. They go to Lima and Cusco and Arequipa. Nobody ever comes here. Thank you for coming. And that's when I realized it didn't matter how good I preached the night before or if I preached. What mattered is I went. And I got on my face and I said, God, the thing is, that's what missions is. It's going someplace. It's not sending a fax, sending an email, or sending an offering. Sometimes the devil works with people saying, if you go to the mission field, they're so poor, you should have just sent your airplane ticket. Well, the Bible doesn't say God so loved the world, he sent an offering or he sent an email. He sent a person. He sent a physical, warm body, cross culture, to love on them. So when we realized that, we just said, our presence is all they needed. God, if you send us back to this nation, we'll give our life to this nation, and we will always remember the forgotten pastors. Wow. Which can lead you into the next step of why we do Haciendo Iglesia Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. Wow. It's just
so that
amazing.
Was 1978. We've been here, came in 83, never went back, and never regret it. I don't regret having raised my family in this culture. We have, like you, we have the best of 2 worlds. Yeah. We understand the American culture and the Spanish culture. And I think it's a beautiful mix. Yeah. And I really believe it's part of what God is doing right now. I don't think it's an accident that you're in Costa Mesa and I'm here. Even though you were born and raised there, your grandparents came there, and it's not an accident that you're there. God wants to mix the salad. And I believe the Latin people are key to what God is going to do in the future.
Oof, that's good. And we're probably getting to that because I love to talk about the hope for the future and the hope of the church in the future. So I would love for you to talk a little bit more towards the end about how the Latin community or the Latin American church is going to be part of that movement of hope of Jesus in the future. Maybe Taylor, would you tell me a little bit of the challenges that you guys maybe you have encountered coming back, from the US, having this call to ministry, and then coming back to Peru? What are some of the challenges that you encountered as you try to approach this new calling in your life, but also coming back to a different culture and different everything?
Yeah, honestly, it was pretty trippy to me because I grew up here, right? From age 2, almost 3 to 15. I left. I would come back every summer, maybe twice a year to visit, but just visit. And I ended up coming back at 25. So my forming years were really in the U.S. I left Peru as a Peruvian in gringo skin, and I had a total transformation while I was there, and I became more American than Peruvian. So when I came back at 25, several things happened. First off, the funny thing is I realized that I had a 15-year-old vocabulary. And it took me a while to kind of just readjust into speaking like a 25-year-old. It was weird. It was funny. In Spanish, yeah. Because obviously, while you've been in forming years, you read books in English, literature, and your vocabulary expands. But my vocabulary in Spanish stayed as a 15-year-old vocabulary. So I had a hard time saying some things that I wanted to say. That was the first weird thing. The second is it took me longer than I thought it would take me to adjust. In that, my dad always says, if you want to be a missionary, it'll take you at least 1 year for you to adapt to the culture. Probably 3 years for you to be effective in ministry in that culture. It'll take you a while, so be patient, make the commitment. And for me, I thought I would come in as a shoo-in, like lock, stock, and 2 smoking barrels. I was in, but it actually took me a whole year, maybe a year and a half, to adjust and fit and find my place. And when I look back at that first year, I was kind of just all over the place, lost, and my parents were very patient and everybody else. And then all of a sudden it clicked. Now my original call to Peru, obviously it's the country, but it has a lot to do with being very specific. I'm here to help my parents, to push them forward, to help their voice be heard better, to help their vision be landed into people's hearts. And so that's been my job description the whole time. So when I remembered that after that full year and a half of just figuring out, graphic design was in my hands. And so that's what I started doing for the church. And I did a few spins, and all of a sudden I have a creative team that we've built. And I look back, and it's been a whirlwind of God being surprising and faithful in every season. And what I'll frame it this way. The reason I'm able to be successful here in Lima with Camino de Vida and my parents, it has very little to do with me as a amazing person. It has a lot to do with my dad and my mom creating a space where people like me and other sons and daughters in the faith can flourish. A safe place to fail. That's what I call it. Wow. Where we haven't been great, but they've been there to pick us up and teach us, hey, you learn, go get it again. No worries. We've all done that. Just continue pushing. You're good. And so me and so many others have flourished inside of this culture because there's that kind of trust that's been given to us, even though we don't deserve it. So to me, it's an honor and a privilege to be here.
Yeah. And you guys I've been noticing you guys have, Haciendo Iglesia Podcast, which is phenomenal, but checking out the Camino de Vida website for the church. You guys have kids podcasts. You have a podcast for Christmas. You have a show on the radio, like 6:40 a.m. radio or something like that. Mm-hmm. You have a YouTube channel. So tell me a little bit about how are Christians supposed to utilize technology in the 21st century for the mission field? or how you guys are utilizing it?
I think it's very interesting. I don't think it even should be a question. I think it's a no-brainer. The fact that in what was it, the 70s and 80s, the boob tube, right? Leave TV, it's a bad place, and leave Hollywood, it's a bad place, and leave music, right? And so today we look at culture and society, and honestly, it's a horrible place because we were absent. There's a fascinating book. It's written by Bob Briner. It's called Roaring Lambs. And he's a famous producer, produced Super Bowls, worked for CBS and different other. And he says that for a long time in church, he felt like his giftings didn't fit in the church. He was a big producer, but he just went to church, and church was the ones that had the calling were the pastors and maybe the worship pastor and maybe the kids ministry, but no one else. But he has a revelation of he is the church out where he is, that he can be the mission field in the TV industry. And it's a call to, hey, let's be roaring lambs in the middle of, and I think we're called, dramatically called to be in every single platform, in every area, even though it's hostile, even though it's not pleasant. We're called to be light in the darkness. And the darker the place, the more we should be there, and the brighter we should be. So I think social media and podcasts and you name it, we need to be there even more so.
Mm-hmm. And Robert, how have you encountered, or how have you? What are the challenges that you have faced with the whole technological thing, and how have you stepped into it? Because I feel like when I see you guys' podcast, it's just so cool that, you have a computer and you're on Zoom and you have like the nice microphone and the cameras. And I think for a lot of people, maybe that could be even intimidating, right? Like, oh man, like I need to show my face and like all these things. I'm just curious, how has that affected you, or how have you stepped into this realm of technology and utilizing it for the kingdom?
Well, first of all, if you're not listening to the youth today, you're irrelevant. You have to hear, you have to listen and step into their world. And right now, their world is a world of digital technology, whether it's video games, and they're into it very young, or the technology. So it's not easy for my generation because we grew up, and the computers came in later with us. But you have to take the time to learn. And we have an incredible team. Taylor talks about how he created a creative team. And that creative team, we started giving them more and more space in the church, and it just kept bringing more and more youth in and getting more and more creative team. And so that team is so phenomenal now. They help me, with the microphones and the computers. What's interesting is we've been in pretty much 7, close to 8 months in strict lockdown. The last few weeks, a little more open in Peru. But probably 7.5 months strict lockdown, which means we couldn't go out to the streets. So what I had in my house, we couldn't even bring equipment over from the church. We had to use my iPhone, which was an old iPhone 7, I think, which was my camera, a computer, and then they were on the phone saying, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this, connect it up this way, take this cable, connect this cable over here. And that's pretty much how we went online.
Yeah.
We now say this, we say Camino de Vida used to be a in-person church with an online presence. Somehow, we don't know what it is, but we're looking that way. Somehow the future is we will be an online church with a present foothold.
Wow. That's phenomenal. That's changing the paradigm. And I see that happening in many churches. Like even before I joined this call, I was on a call with like 70 something pastors from the NAB conference, most of them in the United States and in Canada. And we were talking to this guy named Alan Hirsch, which is one of the missional movement pastors from Australia. And he was sharing a little bit about this idea of learning to play chess without the queen so that you become a really good chess player. Wow. And he's suggesting the idea that sometimes for a lot of churches, the queen has been our Sunday service, right? The thing we do on Sunday, that's the main thing. And it's kind of like COVID forced the world and specifically like the church to say, okay, what can I do if I can't play with the queen anymore? Right. And I think that this is an area where technology and, the microphones and the cameras and all this stuff comes in play. And I love that you're saying it's probably a paradigm shift. And maybe that's why maybe God is behind it and he knows where the future is going. And he's like, hey, if we don't take the church to the online presence, it doesn't, you can have the building, but you cannot have the influence online. Right. Wow. Can you tell me a little bit about Haciendo Iglesia Podcast? A little bit about the purpose of coming together with this. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's in Spanish, but it's so good. I recommend it to anyone that's listening who is Spanish speaking. Go check it out. Haciendo Iglesia Podcast. It's everywhere on Spotify. We'll have it also on our christianpodcast.com. It's going to be part of our directories too. So if people go there, they'll find it. But tell me a little bit about this idea, how it came about and the purpose of it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for recommending it stuff. I'll say this. It was a natural progression for us. We used to do big conferences for pastors to help pastors. And it's what Dad mentioned, the forgotten pastors. So we've always had that movement towards helping pastors. So as far as I can remember, my dad was very involved in either bringing 2,000 pastors from the interior of the country to Lima to be ministered by the best of the best worldwide. We used to do a big conference and a huge expense. We called it Corazon Heart Conference, and that was amazing. We did it for several years, but then it was so weighty as in the costs and the budget. And honestly, when you have a big event, you're inspiring people, but you're not connecting with people, and that was frustrating to us. And so we kind of quit that. And my dad's like, I don't know what's next. And it's interesting because in that lapse of that time, I was invited to go and be a part of a round table with Brian Houston and a bunch of amazing young preachers. We know them all today. And I was like, I'm a fish out of water right here. What am I doing? But it was such an impactful moment in my life. I remember calling my dad and saying, hey, Dad, this is incredible. I think there's something here. And so he called it, Brian Houston called it, Let's Talk Church. And I couldn't translate that to Spanish. Hablemos de Iglesia. It didn't sound good. And I didn't want to copy. So we ended up coming up with the name Haciendo Iglesia, doing church, building church. And we just tried it. We just started doing round tables in different parts of Latin America. And it shocked us, the response, to the point where I don't know how many years that we've been doing it for 7 years, maybe, those round tables, maybe more.
Yeah, more.
Yeah, and it's gotten out of hand. There's so much response, and we're in I think 50 different cities at this, and simultaneously, and obviously COVID kind of halted it. Well, simultaneous to doing these roundtables with pastors with an actual curriculum that we've kind of created and stuff. One day, I went on and saw online that there was a devotional from Brian Houston. This is actually a funny story. And I go, okay, I'll check it out. And I went on, it was on YouVersion, and I saw there's an icon for an audio icon. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I clicked it, and it was Brian Houston's voice reading me the devotional. And I'm like, what? I was amazed and I was upset. And I was upset because it just hit me. It's like, Brian Houston didn't come up with that idea. He didn't say, I wanted my voice in the devotional. Probably what happened was a team said, hey, pastor, we got this idea. Here's the script. You want to come in today and read maybe 10 or 15 of these? He goes, yes, I'll do it. And so I got a deep conviction in my heart that I have to position my parents for the next however many years as content creating years, where we must create content. I think the next 20 years are my parents' best years. So we need to take all their heart and put it on paper. My dad's mentor said, if it's not written, it doesn't exist.
Wow.
And so we became aggressive at it. And in that, obviously devotionals and different things. And one was like, how can I position my dad to do a podcast? Mm-hmm. And so I was like, you know what? I don't want to load him up with work. I want to offload work. Mm-hmm. And so listening to Andy Stanley's podcast one day, it's a brilliant podcast. Probably one of the best and one of the pioneers in the Christian world of podcasts. Obviously, I don't think anybody's been doing it as long as he has. His format is very interesting. He doesn't go on and just talk. He has one of his close friends interview him and prod him and ask him questions. And out of that prodding comes a well of knowledge and information and wisdom. And like, you know what? I can do that. I have the relationship with my dad, and I can prod my dad and have him just out of that abundance. So we started doing that. We started getting together, and he goes, what do you want to talk about though? And I was like, well, you have a bunch of these filters that are great. And he goes, oh, filters? People want to, okay. And so we'd get together literally in the studio, and he'd go, which filter do you want to talk about? And I would go, how about this one? He goes, I love that one. All right, let's go. And we just sit down, and for 15 minutes, we'll just talk about a filter. I would ask him questions, and that's how the Haciendo Iglesia podcast was born. It was a seasonal podcast every 2 weeks, and then we shifted it into being a weekly podcast. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And we couldn't go to the studio anymore. And so we scrambled to just do a Zoom call, and we recorded with 2 different cell phones, 2 different angles, and try to produce it. And I got to say, I am in awe of my dad and my mom as the technician and setting up and recording, and you don't even know the patience, but it's a testimony of, hey, this is worth it to be able to help people.
Props to you, Mr. Robert, for being technologically savvy enough to, or even just the desire to say, you know, I want to bless the church, so I'm going to step into it. And I think you've done it well. What's been your experience from your vantage point doing Haciendo Iglesia podcast with your son?
Let me back up just a little bit, because the amazing thing is the journey that Taylor and I have been on. You know, obviously he's my son, so I've been his dad his whole life. And we had a great father, son, dad relationship. Then I'm also his pastor. And it's a humbling thing to me when somebody trusts you enough to put their life in your hands to guide them spiritually towards eternity. But it's more interesting when it's your son. And then today he's gone from being my son to I'm his pastor to he's my best friend.
Wow.
You know, we've just developed a relationship that is, we just love to hang together and drink coffee together and talk football or church, whatever it is. So I guess when he started coming to me saying, we want to get content, it was like, you know, first of all, explain to me, what do you mean by content? You know, what does that mean? And when he started explaining it, just content, you got to get content out there. People are looking for content. I understood it. And he made it easy. Mm-hmm. You know, the technological side is just kind of intriguing because, you know, the first few days, like I said, we had to go online church one Sunday to the next without being prepared and without getting an equipment from our church over to us. we were stuck with what we had in the house. Well, over the next months, I'd say about 2 or 3 months in, there was a few people that got special permits that we got over to the church, and they actually snuck me over a microphone and brought a couple of things over. And then they were all sitting, okay, now put this cable here, do this, do that. And now I feel like an old pro. Taylor and I actually tape on Wednesdays for the Haciendo Iglesia podcast. And where it used to take me maybe 2 hours to set up, with the Zoom and a couple of my technician guys, okay, Pastor, get your cameras here, the lighting better this way. Now, 15 minutes, I am set, ready to go. Mm-hmm. And so now we're actually doing, instead of just one podcast a week, we're actually doing them 2 and 2. Mm-hmm. But, still a little bit easier. But just to say, I thank God for, the gift that my kids are, my son, my daughter. You talked about your kids. We love the journey of our grandkids. Taylor's got 4 beautiful daughters that just fill our hearts with joy. So
that's
I kind of joke around because part of my mission, obviously, if I'm going to serve my parents and land their hearts into people's hearts, I got to know their heart. And so I was already kind of, I'm a lot like my mom in many ways. I have a lot of that. And people would say, wow, you and your mom are the same person. They would never say that about me and my dad when I was growing up. So I made it my mission to study my dad, to learn my dad, to predict my dad. I would try to just foresee how is he going to decide on this situation, and I would ask a lot of questions, and so what happened is, I actually joke around now. I think I know my dad better than my mom knows my dad. And it's probably true in the sense that, especially on the working side of things. Obviously, there's a whole deeper relationship between my parents that I'll never have, but I actually understand the way my dad thinks, the way he works. He's a very silent leader, a very open-handed leader, and so I had to kind of just reverse engineer a lot of the way we do things in church. Just observing his actions, not so much his words, and so even my mom, today, nowadays, she'll go, "Hey, can you ask your dad this?" And so we just joke around about that. But I think the lesson there is, if anybody is serving their pastor, their main job, objective is to understand their pastor's heart, to study them, to really just get a PhD in knowing your pastor. Because if you do that, that'll make you a better leader. You'll serve him better, and it actually it'll lift you up. So there's been I think a transfusion that's happened toward today. I am very much like my dad. So much so it's kind of freaky. I think that to me it's a joy to be able to do it this way. It's fun.
Awesome. Love it. It's just incredible story. I love everything you guys have said. And as we wrap it up, I want to come back to that question of where is the church going to be in 10, 20 years? And what are maybe some of the tools or maybe some of the advice that you would tell people now that in 10 years, they're going to be practicing? What would be some of your tools, advice, words of encouragement for the church of the future?
Wow. I'll step in real quick and let my dad take it. I remember maybe a month into COVID, strict lockdowns. My daughters at that time, 10 and 8, the older ones, were playing on their iPads. And I'd hear them giggling. They're playing Roblox. I don't know if you guys know what that is. You probably do. But they're playing Roblox, and I heard a voice of a third girl in my house. I'm like, who's here? And so I walked over to them, actually right there behind me in my living room. And what they had done is they had a voice or a video call a FaceTime call happening as they're playing in the same virtual world with their friend. And it was the most weird thing because I'm like, wow, how did they even figure that out? No one, I didn't teach them. They just knew how to do it. And I called my wife over and we talked about it and just hit me like a ton of bricks. Wow, my daughters, they're native virtual natives. And I am not. And that kind of a way of doing things is so foreign to me. And I just saw the speed of the way things were progressing, and we're doing virtual church and trying to get it, and is it going to work or not? And then I felt like one of those like moments where it's the Holy Spirit whispering inside of you. And the question was, what if part of the reason COVID was allowed, right? God allowed it. He didn't send it, he allowed it, is to help us understand that if we don't understand virtual church as essential, because we always thought of virtual church as, that's okay. I remember even saying when Judah Smith and Church Home, when they launched their virtual church in way early on, I thought of it as, oh man, they're copping out. It's a cop out. They're not building church. They're just doing virtual church. Oh, whatever. And the word in Spanish is menospreciar. I just thought of it as something less, a secondary church. But the Holy Spirit said, what if COVID is helping us accelerate to the speed of that generation so that when that generation is 18, 10 years from now, and 20, that their generation doesn't pass us up on the Autobahn going 300 miles an hour while we're just going 20 as a church? What if this is allowed now so that we don't lose a whole generation 10 years from now? And I believe that with my whole heart. I really, truly believe that we were, and I repent, Judah, and they heard God before most of the world heard God in doing virtual church in such an amazing way. And I'm like, oh, wow. So then my dad says, we've went from a church, a presence or a physical church with a virtual foot, or the foot in the virtual, to a virtual church with the foot in the physical. And I'm expectant to see what the next 10 years is going to happen. I think now we're becoming equipped to reach a generation which in 2019 we weren't equipped to reach.
Mm-hmm. So good.
Yeah, let me throw a couple of things in there. Wrote a book a little while back in Spanish only. It's called La Iglesia Relevante, the Relevant Church.
Mm-hmm.
And the basic thing is relevance isn't being cool. It's not being padre. It's not trying lights and, skinny jeans. Relevance just means scratching the itch, finding the itch and scratching it. The thing is we have way too important of a message to be irrelevant. We cannot have an irrelevant message. This message is exactly what the world needs today. But the problem was, and especially in Latin America, like we talk about the roundtables we did a goal, and the goal is we want to help 1,000 churches in South America break 1,000 members. We want to help churches get unstuck because so many churches are stuck, and they're especially stuck in a time warp of yesterday's success, yesterday's revival. If you go to Argentina, the great revival of the 80s and the 90s. Well, sometimes the biggest block from success tomorrow is success yesterday, because people try to go back to the way it was instead of the best is yet to come. Well, where the relevant church, if you're doing church today, like 10 years ago, you're irrelevant. That's what I used to say. And then COVID hit. So now if you're doing church today, like February, you're irrelevant.
Wow.
Okay. And I hate to tell guys this, but God is not obligated to keep your church open.
Oof.
If you look at Europe today, places where Wesley preached, where Calvin preached, where Spurgeon preached, Martin Luther, all the great revivals of Europe, Germany, England, Switzerland. Today, those churches, I mean, they had nights of glory, glorious moves of God, people getting saved and revival. Today, they're museums or restaurants. So the possibility of the church we're building today becoming a restaurant tomorrow, all those little grandmas giving their tithes and their offering to buy bricks to build a church that tomorrow might become, just a bookstore. That hurts. So we have got to change. And the change of the future, I feel God has taken us by our hand and walking us into a new way. The methods always change. The message stays the same. But the idea, and Taylor says this better than anybody, that we're not trying to reproduce online what we had going Sunday. We were really good at Sunday. It's like you said, the queen. We were really good with the queen on the board. Take the queen away. Okay, we can't do it that way anymore. So we were really good at Sunday, but online can't be like Sunday. Online today is, you adjust, you tweak it. The main goal of us is to keep people connected, keep people engaged, keep the gospel message out there, and grow the church. So I don't know, Taylor, if you want to mention in closing your deal about the difference of in-person and online church.
Yeah, no, I think if online is virtual is real to a whole different generation, to our kids, right? It's not a subpar world. It's actually a real world. It's a real place. There's a phenomenon that's happened where we've been doing this for over half a year. We have Christians, new believers that only know our church in a virtual format. And we actually call them virtual natives now. We had physical natives, but now we have virtual natives. In the past, we might have said those are inferior believers, inferior members of our church. Now they're not. They've never stepped foot in our physical church, but they are a very much a part of our virtual church. So there's no distinction now. So how are we going to push this forward? We got to rethink the way we do virtual. Virtual is on a screen. We don't have control of the environments. We're being projected into people's homes or workplaces or cars or transport. We don't have control. So maybe what we say is offensive to the dad in the house. Maybe what we say is just stupid to the kids. So we have to regulate how we say things. We have to change what we say, and also be sensitive of people in difficult situations. So our services can't be an hour and a half. Our services now are 30 to 35 minutes. Wow. Literally. We've even cut out offering from our service. What we do is we do a lobby time before and after, before the service and after the service. And there we give some announcements. We give maybe, hey, if you want to support the church, you can do it here. But during the physical actual service, we don't say, and that's because we want to invite people. If you invite a friend to church and the first thing they see is offering, they go, "Oh man, really?
That's what it's about."
It's a gimmick. Is this a pyramid scheme or something? What have I clicked into? Mm-hmm. But because it's different when you're in the environment, it's different than when you're online. So we have to rethink. And I love this point. I'll finish with this. We used to be really good at our liturgy, our queen. But we've forsaken the connection, and we're not a church if we're not connected. And I think what we're learning is we got to connect better with people. And maybe Sundays, maybe liturgy is one leg, and the other leg is connection. And maybe if we have two legs going, we'll go good. Maybe as a church, we're just hopping on one leg for a long time. And that's why we never got the traction we needed. But now that we have the strong liturgy when we come back, and also good connection, maybe we can just, instead of just hopping, we can run. we can take places and really be the head and not the tail, be the church that God wants us to be the church in Isaiah 2:2, the mountain of the Lord rising above all the other mountains, being the most attractive thing on earth, being the biggest attraction on earth. And so I'm very hopeful for what's in store, but we do have to understand that we got to connect by any means possible.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Robert. This is a phenomenal conversation. I think it moves the church into the future. It gives people tools. It opens people's minds to the future, to the possibilities. And even as I'm thinking, one of my early podcasts with Brian Sanders, he's got a book named The Underground Church. And he started a church in Tampa called the Underground Network. And I was talking to him, and he was mentioning a little bit about how the church in Latin America, it's almost like ahead of what the Western church is doing, as we think of the church maybe in the United States and England. He's like, we really got to look at our friends in the South and the church in the South in Latin America, and the global church in Africa and what they are doing. And I feel like you guys are at the forefront of what God is doing through his church and with his church. And specifically, coming out of Peru, out of Latin America, I just want to commend you guys for the work that you guys are doing. It's unbelievable. It's amazing. It's beautiful to see it. Thank you so much, guys, for being on the show. It's been phenomenal. I hope one day, maybe, as opportunities arise and this whole COVID is over and it's behind, maybe one day, I would love to even come to Peru, get to know you guys, bring my family. You guys seem like a beautiful family. So thank you guys for being here.
You're welcome. Whenever you can make it, we'll make it happen.
Yeah, we got some good food here. I'm just saying.
Good coffee too.
Yes. All Thanks, man, for this opportunity. It's been a blast. It's been really, really good. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Christian Podcast. If you liked this episode, share it with friends and family. Make sure you subscribe and leave a positive review wherever you can. You can also visit christianpodcast.com to learn more about our show. Hasta la vista.